Hello, everybody. Welcome to our March Training Tuesday event for OU Campus. Today's topic is exploring reusable content. We're going to be taking an in-depth look at assets and snippets, including how to create and utilize them. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as this session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online by clicking on the Q&A tab located on the right-hand side of your WebEx screen. Make sure it's the Q&A tab and not chat, so that we have your email address in case your question warrants a follow-up reply. Simply type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen and send. We will attempt to address any questions during the presentation. After the formal presentation has ended, we will review and answer all remaining questions. Today's presenter is Brian Laird, Senior Web Technician at Omni Update. Brian?
Thank you, Erica. So as she said, today we'll be talking about exploring reusable content. And so let us go ahead and get started. This is what we'll be covering today. First, we will talk about the different types of reusable content. And those includes the snippets and assets, and also includes. And then we also want to talk about when do you want to use each type of reusable content, when is it appropriate, in some common challenges and solutions, and we'll do that inside OU Campus. Then we'll have a little time for some Q&A. So let's go ahead and first start about talking about assets. So assets allow you to create and edit reusable content in a single location, and you can place these assets once you've created it. You can just insert them into any editable region on any number of pages that you want. And what this does, among other things, is it does protect your content from changes. So if somebody is in an editable region and you don't want them to edit a bit of information, such as maybe the university name or some other important piece of information, you can use an asset to keep that content protected from a regular user in the editable region. All they can do is insert that asset. There are different types of assets, and so there they are. You can do a web content asset, allowing you to use like the WYSIWYG editor, and you can just enter in your content as you normally would, but separate it out as an asset. You can put just plain text as an asset. You can use source code, or you could create an image gallery or a form, and those require some XSL coding behind them, but they're all available as different types of assets. There are some different kinds of uses that you could use assets for. One of them is just using recurring text or common content that you might want to have on multiple pages. So if you have, for instance, the university phone number, and you have that on a variety of pages throughout your site, you could put that on into an asset, and it would that recurring content would just, if you needed to update it for whatever reason in the future, you could update it once, republish your asset, and all those pages would then be updated. You could use it for something like a president's name, email addresses, phone numbers, articles, quotes, some kind of accolade with departmental branding. Basically, anything that you want to have on those multiple pages that really is that kind of consistent content is really a good choice for an asset. As I talked about a minute ago, you can use it for image galleries. You can do it for forms. You can use assets for comments or other discussions. And you can also use it for different pieces of code. If you have like a JavaScript or some other client-side scripting, or even you can do some things with some server-side code. But there are some challenges that go with that, and I'll be going into one of those in this example later. But these are all different uses that we commonly will use assets for. And they are very good at being used for these types of situations. Another type of reusable content are snippets, and they're a little bit different from assets. They just provide a format with information that actually can be changed on the page. So when you insert a snippet onto a page, unlike an asset where you can't really edit the content and it's protected, a snippet becomes part of the page. It is part of the source code of the page when you insert it in there, And so it is then editable by the user. So what that does is it allows you to have content on your page that starts and gives you kind of a good structure of a starting point. And then you can have that content editable by the user, and it can be kind of keep that consistency of your general starting point, but then you can edit it as needed after. So this is not something that you would use like a global include, like you could kind of do like an asset or an actual include file where you have this global information going across a page. Snippet really is for independent content on each page that would have some standard formatting. And so one of the things that it does is it actually can ensure that you start with that right formatting, then a user wants to do some kind of a special element. Such an example could be like a table. If you want the table to have certain heading fields or a certain look initially, instead of just creating a table in the editor, you could actually create a snippet for that. And all the people who insert that snippet on their pages would start with that same table with the same headings that could then be populated with different information for different pages. And that's just one example of many different possibilities of what you could use for snippets. Snippets can also be, they're HTML-based, so they usually would not have any server-side or client-side code. It's more just that HTML structure. So if you have some more dynamic elements, you're more likely going to want to use something like an asset or an include or some other solution than a snippet for that kind of information typically. So here's some example uses of what we'd use snippets for. Like I just mentioned, a table structure is a good example for a snippet. You could have an image placeholder with a caption. You might want to have some kind of specially formatted HTML. That could make a good snippet for you. Maybe some non-recurring formatted text. Also not listed here is if your implementation includes a table transformation or other kind of a code transformation that was developed for you. A snippet might be used to plop in a particular HTML structure. Going with that idea of the formatted HTML that you could edit in XSL can actually translate that into a different format. But these are just kind of some basic ideas of what you commonly would use snippets for. And then also the third type of reusable content that I want to discuss briefly is include files. And sometimes these, have similar uses to assets, and so they can sometimes get a little confusing of when it makes sense to use one or to use another. And so they are considered global. And so by global, I just mean that when you put a include file on a page, every page that uses that include file is updated as soon as that include file is updated. So very similar to assets in that sense. And so when you edit the include, as soon as that include is republished, all the pages that are using it are also updated accordingly. Similar idea, same thing as assets. What's not as similar to an asset is that these include files, when you use them on your pages, they're actually usually hard-coded to a particular location. So the XSL or whatever code that you're using behind there, or if you're just using a straight HTML page, whatever your back end is, typically it'll be XSL, would tell the page, this is the include I want to use, and this is where the include is going to be included. So that would be how an include file would typically be worked. Some example uses of include files is some of them similar to assets would be like recurring text common content, something with departmental branding like an article or quote or other accolade, code, JavaScript or other client-side scripting. You could use them for some kind of image galleries or comments, just like you can for assets, but the difference is these are not going to be processed by the XSL engine. So if you have a particular image gallery as an example, and you want to have that as an include file, it would have to actually contain the source code of the output of that, as opposed to a nice, asset, which you could use an image gallery asset where you can easily have the end user modify it. But you can, if you want to have a place where you can just edit it only in source code, then you could use an include file to create that same image gallery and put it on a specific spot on a page or a number of pages. Include files are very commonly used for navigation files in OU Campus. If you have a _nav or side nav file in your implementation, you'll almost always see one of those in most implementations that we do, and those are navigation files, and each of those are includes. Quite commonly, they'll have the .inc extension to identify them as includes, but they don't have to necessarily. But that's an example of one that is used to share and include across a section some common content. And you can also commonly use the include files for headers and footers. So when you have that content that's all the way across, each page, on every single page your site is using that same content, that's a common place where you would use an include file as an example there. So what I'd like to do now is to go and just talk a little bit about when you should use the different types of reusable content that we're talking about here. One question that is kind of a good one to ask initially to help kind of distinguish which one should you use is to ask yourself this question: is the exact content shared across pages? And if you answer yes to that, that you want the same exact content shared across multiple pages in your site, then most likely you're going to be talking about an asset or an include file. Now, once you've isolated that, you still don't know which one of those to use. So the next kind of big question you really want to ask yourself is, how many pages will be shared across? Is it global, or is it only on select pages? And the answer of this will help you kind of decide what makes more sense. If it's going to be a global content that is on every single page of your site, such as like the header or the footer, particularly that information doesn't really change that much, doesn't need to be edited too often, that is typically going to be something that we'd recommend an include file for. And the reason being is when you republish that include, it is affecting all your pages immediately by republishing one file, and the include is then working on all those pages immediately. When you do an asset, that typically would be more for something that is either on just select pages or in parts of a page, or if it's going to be used in something more global, it would be something that needs to be a little bit more edited by the user, by the end user, and not just in source code. And one of the drawbacks of using an asset in that kind of a situation is that the asset would then be published, and once you make your changes, you publish your asset, and then you would then have to wait for OU Campus to go through every single page in your site that's using that and update each and every one of those pages. So the process is a little bit more intensive on it, and it's not quite as easy to make a quick update. You do have to wait for that to be updated and have all that go through. Whereas in the global instance, if you have an include file, you republish the one include file, and the server automatically will grab that to the next time the page is loaded. So that's kind of a good, helpful distinction sometimes between the assets and the include files, is kind of getting the scope of where it's going to go, as well as, how easy does it really need to be edited for the user. Another good question of trying to figure out when do you want to use what kind of reusable content is this one here. Is the basic structure shared, but is there going to be different content on the pages that use this reusable content piece? If that's the case, where you have something, where you have that basic structure is all the same, but the content inside varies from page to page, then you're most likely going to want to go with a snippet. And the reason being is, like I was describing with the snippets, is when you look at the snippets and you see the different content on it, like that table example, you could create a table that has certain headings on it, but the content inside the table could change from page to page. That is something where you could create a snippet to ensure that same structure, but again, the content is different on different pages. So that's a good candidate for snippets. Another good question to ask yourself is there specific functionality that was built into your templates using some specific type of reusable content? And this is usually going back and relating to, what was implemented, or when you're planning out what is going to be implemented, whether Omni Update does the implementation for you or you're working on something yourself. Is there some specific functionality that you want to have that utilizes a particular type of reusable content? An example that I was talking about before was with table transformations. Typically, what we would use is a snippet for that, where you can drop the snippet onto the page, and since the table will have a particular structure, the code that goes on the back end can actually target that particular HTML structure and transform it into something more complex, like an accordion or some other special content that is a little bit more complex than just regular HTML. But typically we'd use a snippet for something like that, where it enforces that structure, but the content inside of it can change from instance to instance. If you have, the LDP with the galleries or the forms, that is something where you would typically use assets for, since the assets have that nice interface where you can easily create and manage your galleries, and you can manage and create different forms with all sorts of different form elements through the OU Campus system. That would be something where if you have those already built in, then you want to take advantage of what has been built for you or what you're planning to build to use the appropriate type of reusable content that's available in OU Campus. So kind of with that overview, let's go ahead and take a look inside of OU Campus at a couple different examples of reusable content and how we can set them up and use them. So just give me 1 second here, and I am going to switch over to OU Campus. There we go. And so here we have a website, and it's using Galena University here. And what we want to do now is we want to look at this website, and there is actually a gallery in here. So I've already added one piece of reusable content with an asset. So if I look in here, it's giving me my image gallery. I can go from image to image and so on. But this has been created through an asset using an LDP gallery. If I go in to edit this page and I go into the main content, you can see here that I cannot touch any of that code that is inside this gallery. All I have the ability to do is to insert this gallery where I want it to be, or I can delete the one that's here that I have selected currently. I can't actually go into that gallery code. So when we were talking about how the assets help you protect the code and what's in there, I cannot adjust that here from this WYSIWYG editor. What I can do is actually go into this asset, and I know the name of it by looking here. It's called Sample Image Gallery. So if I go into that, and I'm just going to go to Content Assets, and that'll show you where the assets are. I'm just going to open this in a new window here, and you can see there's this Sample Image Gallery. And if I click on that, and I click Edit, you can see here's my gallery options. I've got these 3 images here with the different information that I have. And I can edit this. I can move them around, change the content, whatever I want to do with this asset. And I can change it all here. Behind the scenes, when you actually look at this asset, this is what it's actually outputting. It's outputting a bunch of code that the XSL for this site is recognizing and transforming into the gallery that we see on the page. So if you're not used to looking at source code or anything else, you don't really have to know what this means. But the important thing to realize is that there is just a bunch of source code here that the user is not editing, and when they go into the page, all they have to know is how to insert that gallery. And the end user, all they have to do in the gallery asset is being able to know how to use that nice interface. So that's a nice benefit of a image gallery using assets. And I could, go in and insert this asset from the WYSIWYG. I can insert that anywhere I want on as many pages as I want. And as long as my design accommodates that, I can, put this image gallery on any one of my pages in, the regions that it has been set up for. Typically, a main content region is the most common place where you would see an image gallery. So that's a nice kind of piece there. But I can insert any kind of asset that I have created or any kind of a snippet that we want. And so that's, on my page. And really what you can do is you just, I like to give myself a little space to know what I'm, where I'm inserting things. I've found sometimes if I try to put a piece of reusable content in between two pieces of text, sometimes it is a little bit harder to use initially to try to edit that and put it in there. My personal preference is to kind of add that extra space here. It just makes it a little easier. Then when I insert my asset or my snippet in here, so let's say if I insert that image gallery again, I've kind of got a nice spot here, and I can always then click around next to this area, and I can delete it from here. But I can kind of move things around from there around it as opposed to trying to put it in line from where I have. That tends to work better for me, but if you have different practices that work well for you, make sure you find a practice that works well and stay consistent with it, so that way when you see the behavior, it makes sense for you. And that will make it a lot easier to make sure you know what you're doing as you go forward.
We have a question from Matt McCullough. We used an asset in a props file to put a little mini events calendar into program page sidebars. Great to edit in one spot, but it seems because we did it in props, we need to republish all pages using those props files. Would an include be better?
Yeah, and that's a good question because there's a few considerations when you're talking about, those assets and the includes there. And one of it is using that, like you pointed out, when you edit it in one spot, it makes it very easy to utilize there. So an asset, is kind of a nice thing there. You can put it in there, republish your, the pages that use those props files, and it would work. To be able to, edit it in one spot and then instantly update those pages, you could use an include in that situation, but you would then be talking about editing only in source code, and you would have to kind of define, where that include needs to go. So on a lot of those kind of questions like that, it does depend a little bit on the specific scenario of how you want to edit it, what, kind of content do you have, who's editing the content, on what makes the most sense. So in some situations, as long as you don't mind republishing all those pages, that ease of use of editing in one spot with a asset and being able to republish, after having an easy user editing experience might be worth having to republish pages, and kind of those trade-offs are what you kind of want to think about when you go through those two different kinds of ways.
Another question, Paul Mattis wants to know, can you clone an asset in order to create a new asset?
I don't believe you can. If they did something like that, that's something I'm not aware of. When you do a new asset, really all you can do is just, you can copy an asset, and then you would be able to do that. It's not strictly a clone, but you can, I think this is essentially what you're looking for. So let's say if I have this image gallery, you notice you can't do it for that. So depending on the type, if it's like a source code, you should be able to copy it as you need there, but some of these more complex ones like galleries and I think forms, you can't copy it, and you would have to start from scratch. And hopefully that kind of addresses that one well for you. Okay, I don't see any other questions at the moment. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about snippets here for a second. And what I want to do is just kind of show a little bit about how you might create a snippet using something that is a little bit more structured like a table. So browsing through Galena, I did see this page here, and it has this nice fast facts figure here. And maybe you want to reutilize this particular table structure and have a heading on it, so people will create a table with a heading, and they want to have a number of something with these two columns. But right now, this just exists as a source code on this page. So if I go and edit this page right now, and I go to the main content region, you can see here's a table that we can edit here. It's got this heading here, but I can't really duplicate this structure without recreating the table from scratch and inserting my heading and all that. So if we want to create a snippet out of this that would allow you to then utilize that very well, what we can do is take the source code of this, and we'll save it into a file. And then when you have that file created, you just register that snippet in the site under Content Snippets, and you'll be able to use it. So the way that we'll do that is the first thing we need to do is actually grab that source code. So I'm actually going to go into the Source tab here. So you do need a little bit of HTML knowledge to be able to identify the piece that you're looking for. But if I scroll down, I can see here's the fast facts, and I can see there's this H4 and a table. And so this is all that I'm going to care about, and this is the most code that you really have to be able to understand to be able to do this. So with this particular one, what we'll do is I will copy this here, and I'll just do the right-click and copy so you can all see that. Keyboard shortcuts with Control-C or Command-Z, C are all work just as well, and depending if you're Mac or PC. I'll let you decide what is best for you on that one, but you can copy this, and now all we need to do is create a file that we can reference so that we can insert this on other pages. So what I'm going to do is I am now going to go out of this page, and I'm going to go into _ resources, and there is a snippets directory here where you can, it's kind of a nice out of the way spot where you can place these, but you could create a snippet anywhere you want. And then depending on the type of setup that you have for your templates, when you say new template here, you may see one that gives you like a new file to create a new file like this. And if you do, that's great. That's a great way to create a new file in OU Campus. If you don't have that kind of a template set up, another easy way to do that is go to the source code of any file you want, and you can do save as, and that's another kind of a nice workaround to give you that. But I'm going to call this, fact table. And the extension can be .inc, it could be HTML. It doesn't matter too much for a snippet as long as it's a, just a generic extension there. I'm going to go ahead and use HTML in this sense. Again, you can place these snippets anywhere you want. I'm only placing them here just for organizational purposes. So let me go ahead and save that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all of this and get rid of it because now I want to put my new content in. So I'll go ahead and paste my table that I had here and that code that I want to make into a snippet into this particular file that I have here. I'm actually kind of a stickler here for the formatting, and I really don't like this white space like this, so there's an awesome little shortcut I like in the OU Campus editor where if I select all with Control-A or Command-A, then what I can do is hold down Shift and hit Tab, and it automatically formats my source code for me. So if anybody loves to do work in source code or uses it a lot, that auto formatting is just Shift and Tab together to be able to make it look nice. And it doesn't really matter where you are in the source code editor. I find that a very useful shortcut, one of my favorites in OU Campus. Now, the one that I like is Control S for save that I just did here, but you can also use the Save button to be able to save this. And once this is saved, we don't need to do anything else here. All we really need to do is to make sure that this content is what I want my default content to be. So going into this, if I don't want these numbers initially, I just want kind of a blank spot, I could, leave these blank, or I could have the pre-populated numbers, or maybe I want pre-populated fields, or maybe I don't want this to be called fast facts. Whatever information you want as the default when people insert this on their page, that's what you could change this to now. So maybe, I have a question here that says, can you make the source code a bit bigger on your screen? And sure, I can do that. Hopefully that you can see that better there. But you can see this, I can update any of this content. So maybe instead of fast facts, we can, call this something else. And maybe we want to have the default be, information, helpful information, something like that. Again, this will be editable by the user after it's inserted, but just to illustrate here that you can make this whatever the starter content you want to be what it is. So let me go ahead and save this here. And now we have our snippet file, but if I go to my page and I want to now, say, insert that table here on my page we've been working with, and I go into insert the snippet, you'll see I actually don't have a snippet here to use. And so what we need to do is actually register the snippet in OU Campus so that we know that this file is supposed to be used as a snippet. And that's really a very simple thing to do. So if I go to Content, Snippets, all I need to do is to make sure that I have a category for my snippet to go into, so you can organize them as you would like to. And then I actually need to have the snippet itself. So let me go ahead and click this new button here and just create a category. And I'll just call this Training Tuesday as my category. And now that I have a category, I can add snippet files into here so that way OU Campus knows that this is a snippet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again hit New. You can see I'm under Snippets here instead of Categories now, and I'm under the particular category I created. So if I hit New here, I do need to give it a name. So I'm going to call this, helpful information. I could change the category that I'm putting it into with the drop-down. It'll show me all the different categories. But the other really important thing here is to choose that file that I created just a minute ago. And that's my snippet file. So I'm just going to use this file chooser. So you do have to remember where you put it. In this case, I went to Resources, and then I went to Snippets. And here is my fact table. So all I do is I just choose that file. And if you want to, you can put a helpful description here that'll display when you're looking at snippets in the list and you want to update them. So you can then go to, if you wanted to say, this provides a heading and a table for helpful facts. You could do it as useful as that would be. This is not required, so it's not bold here. But let me go ahead and create this, and you can see now I have this snippet here registered in OU Campus. If I made a mistake, I can actually click on this and edit this. So maybe this was wrong. I needed to be an exclamation point. So there you go, and you can save that. And you can see that description here, so when you're kind of looking through your snippets as you get a lot of them, it can help you see what you're editing or changing if you need to at that point. So now that we have our snippet, we've registered it, we're done now. We can go to our page, we can go into an editable region, and we can insert this snippet and start using it. You can see it's listed right here. If we had different categories, you could filter them by categories or type in to filter by name using OU Campus. But all I have to do is select this new snippet, I insert it, and you can see I have a snippet now on the page here. So it has that helpful information text as the heading. It has this number of with all this information. But since it's a snippet, I can now edit this content. Instead of 155, I could have, 200 here and, change all this information to whatever you want it to be. Maybe it's undergraduate students, whatever you want it to be. All this information is editable on the page. If I save this, I'm going to, again, go to the source code just for a second to show you the difference here between an asset and a snippet. So if you remember, we had this asset at the bottom of the page, and now we have this snippet table here in the middle of the page. If I look at the source code of this, we can take a look. And again, I don't like the formatting of this very well, so I'm just going to select all and do my Shift Tab so it's a little bit easier to read here. You can see here is that table that I added in there. You can see the heading and the table. It's that same structure, but you can see this HTML is part of the page. If I go down to the asset that I have here, all I've got is this little squiggly marks and the number with this letter here. And what that is that's called a dependency tag in OU Campus. Files and links and different references can have that in OU Campus. And all that is just an ID tag that tells OU Campus where to pull that content from. So the actual code for that asset, all that, that stuff that I was showing you earlier, is actually not part of this page. It's just being referenced here. But you can see the snippet code is actually part of the page. It can be edited on the page. So that's an important distinction between the two of them. And so that's, I don't really need to save anything in the source. What it asked me there is it asked, did I want to save changes because I changed the formatting. So technically, I changed the source code. So I did not really care on that. But that allows you, in a simple way, you can take any HTML content that you want. I happen to use a heading and a table. But you could take any source code that you want to have and make it into a snippet that would be easy for the user to edit and use accordingly. All right. So that's kind of what I wanted to go over with the snippets hands-on there. And I also wanted to look a little bit into assets. So with the assets, there's a couple different things in particular that you can do, particularly with a source code asset where you might cause some issues with the placing it on the page. So let me go ahead and go back into my tab over here where I have assets at the moment. And you can see I've got a couple source code assets here. One of these, I just prefixed them here to find them easy in the over here, but they're just hello world. If you're encoding, the first thing you ever do is you could say hello world and you output that text to make sure things are working. So if I wanted to do that in PHP code, then what I could do is I can look here, and this is, if you understand PHP, it's just the source code, and what it's doing is echoing out this HTML. So it's just echoing out a paragraph that has the text hello world on your page. And it has to be inside these PHP tags to be able to render on the server if you're using a PHP server. So when we're looking at this here, the problem that we're going to run into is when we insert this on our page is being rendered and processed through the XSL engine. And this is not valid XSL code. And so it's going to actually give us a issue and say, this isn't XSL, what are you trying to do to me here? So let me just go ahead and give myself a spot here. Let me insert that PHP asset here. And when I save it, I get a nice error here. And it's saying there's a problem here. And so I'm not able to actually see this. Here's your big red box that you may have seen before if you've encountered errors in OU Campus. And all I did was insert an asset. So that is something you want to be careful about when you use a source code asset. It's a something where if you put it and it's not XML formatted, that the XSL engine will not be able to process it. So what you can do is, you have a couple different options. the first thing I'm going to do is to be able to fix this so the page renders again. I'm going to go ahead and remove that asset from the source code and save it so I can see my page again. So now at least I'm back up to where I was. That's always kind of a nice thing to be able to, if you break something, be able to go back to where you were. But then you can, if you want this PHP to work on your page, you either have to write some crazy stuff in your PHP to make it so that the XML does not see it as non-XML, where you make it into HTML entities, and it's not a very good way to go. Or you can adjust the XSL code behind the scenes, and if you have a developer who knows how to do those kind of things, that would be the way to do that. So that when you're in preview and you're editing this page, it doesn't actually try to process that PHP and give you that error, but when you publish it, you still want it to do what it does. And that's just something that your developer could do in the XSL to make that happen. By contrast, though, there are some source code assets that you can put on the page and they'll work just fine. So for instance, if I look at this JavaScript asset, it's just a script tag, you know, some basic HTML, and I just did an alert that says hello world. If I insert this one on here, you can see it is, has that XML format. None of this is going to break as content inside of this particular node. So it's not going to have any issues for me when I insert this on the page like I had on the PHP. XSL will say, okay, this is an XML code. I'm not going to throw an error and say that this is a problem here. So for simple code like this, you could insert that on the page and you don't have to account for it. And so I do want to kind of illustrate that here. So when I go into the main content here again, and let me insert this asset, which is my JavaScript hello world. When I save this one, you can see here's my hello world popped up right here as a pop-up. I know everybody loves pop-up these days. But you could use whatever code you want in there as long as it's you know, XML compliant inside of a source code asset. But again, if you have something more complex, you are going to need to account for that. And the one thing you can do is actually in the XSL, and at the risk of those who aren't code savvy, don't worry about this, but if you do understand code, inside in this particular one, we have some different functions and template matches that we have here in the XSL. And I believe for this one, inside of functions, there is a PHP, actually I'm in matches, sorry. Went in the wrong one. There you go. So in the template match here, it matches processing instructions on PHP and outputs them. If I change this in the code, and so just bear with me for just a second here. These are HTML comments, which you can use in the XML, or XSL, sorry. And so if I comment out the old one and I do this new one, if you understand code in XSL, all it's doing is saying, if you're publishing the page, then execute the PHP. Otherwise, when you're not publishing the page, output some kind of a code, a message that says, you know, PHP code's being used here. You can only edit it in source code, but when you publish it, it's going to show. Something like that. So if I save this, and now if I go back and put that asset back on, that PHP asset back on my page, let me just, again, get some space to work with here. And so let me put that hello world there. Now when I save this, I did not get that error, and I can still edit my page. And then when I publish this page, you can see the PHP there. That's just one simple way of getting around that in code to be able to do that. So if you understand code, that's a good way to be able to make that happen. But if you don't understand code, that's something that you could potentially talk to your developer or your implementation team at OU campus here at OmniUpdate to be able to adjust and give you that possibility there. but it's something you definitely want to keep in track of when you're working with assets that are source code, that it's going to try to process that source code in the XSL engine unless you account for it in that source code. So just something to keep in mind there. So that's kind of the big examples that I wanted to show for today, and I do want to kind of open it up if there are any other questions or comments on any of this in the chat here. Let's see here. I see it's a question here. It says that I want to have a piece of content reusable, but only I can update this reusable content. When another editor reuses it, they cannot update the content. It'll only display whatever is there. Is snippet the right option? Okay, so you want to be able to only be the only one to edit this content. So let's say if you had like this table here and you don't want other people to edit the content. If you put it into a snippet, like we did with this particular one here, then as long as that person edits and puts that snippet on the page, then they can, it's editable by whoever inserted that snippet or whoever has access to that editable region. If you want to protect that content from the user, then you might want to place it into an asset. So that way, when they can still insert it on their page, but they can't change the content from what it was. And so an easy way of doing that, again, is you can do the same thing we did with the snippet, is we can take our content and save it. And what I can do here is go into assets and just I'll create a new source code asset. And I'll call this, protected content table. Then I'll paste my content inside of my editable region here. By the way, Shift-Tab also works there as well, but I do have to have it as HTML or it's not going to format it as HTML. I can put that content in here. So now I have my asset. I will publish it out. And now if I want to use this on this page that we're working on here, let me go ahead and edit this again. And go into my main content region. So I will remove the content that I had previously here as a snippet, and now we're going to insert that same content as an asset. And so I called that protect content table, and I will save. And now I'm seeing that same content that I had on the page, but now when I want to edit it, I can limit who can edit this content. It's only whoever has access to that asset. And assets do have, the different access settings. So you can, on this particular one, I can edit the asset, and I can say who has it available to any of the groups that you have, your access groups of who can edit the asset and who can use the asset. This will allow you to kind of have that control of who can edit the content and who cannot edit the content.
We also have another question.
Sure.
Saying, how is the access limited on snippets? For example, I might have a snippet I want used only on certain pages or by certain people. Is that possible to limit, and how? So I think, again, that's related, where a snippet can be, I don't believe there's asset groups or there's access groups for snippets.
Right. You just create the snippets here, and so it's really, all you can really do is, create the snippets and make them available or not available for the snippets. Yeah, they don't really have that access settings like they do with the assets.
And as far as snippets only working on certain pages or within certain areas on pages, I would say probably the best practice for that is to sort your snippets into categories, with the categories like having titles that relate to where they are. So if you say, oh, these are snippets that can only be used on a home page, then they go in a category named homepage snippets, and that way you can tell your users where those snippets should be placed. It's not quite as enforceable as access groups, but hopefully it'll at least provide that information.
Right, right. And the other piece that you could potentially go there as far as limiting snippets is you could actually update the toolbar that is available to have the ability to do snippets all or nothing, but it's not really a limit per snippet idea. At this point, the best bet to do it is to really have those snippets into those categories and be able to, just train your user of which ones are supposed to be used. And if you are worried about particular users using a snippet on a page that they aren't supposed to or using a snippet they aren't supposed to, you could use the workflow settings in OU Campus for approvers and so on to make sure that those are approved before the changes are made as well.
Daria Kemka asks, so level 4 and up can make assets, but snippets are only 9 and 10. What's the rationale for limiting snippet registration?
I believe, and I'm not the actual developer who who have worked on creating that particular limiting, but the rationale, as I understand, is that the snippets are really something that you're going to set up for your users. So usually it's somebody who's a little bit more advanced, who understands how to create that piece and administrate it, that would have the access. Assets, you can do things like source code and image galleries, which are a little bit more common than an end user might just create. And an end user typically would not create snippets as much as use snippets. And so that's kind of the rationale that, as I understand, of why that would kind of be that difference between the assets can, you can create assets at a lower level than creating snippets.
Wingcom asks, when creating assets, can we have folders or categories and apply added access at that level? At the moment, we do not. It's simply there's assets, and you can assign access on a per asset basis, but there's no sort of grouping them.
Right. The best you can really do at this point with grouping is if you go into the asset, into the properties, you do have the access like you had here. But you can also tag your assets. So let's say if I wanted to call this, Training Tuesday, I can create a tag for this, and then this protect content table has this tag associated with it. And then, you can, filter these assets. You can filter them by tag, and you can kind of view them that way. But that's really the closest to be able to, kind of group your assets, and that's more of an organizational thing than actually an access level for assets.
Okay. Daria Kemka says, we have some level 8 designers who we would like to give the ability to register snippets. Is there any way to do that? I don't believe there is. That might be possible in the future with the user roles when those are implemented, but at the moment, I think the ability to create the snippet itself is restricted to levels 9 and 10. Yeah, I don't think there's a way around that particular setting. Not off the top of my head.
At the moment, I don't think there is anything that actually allows you to register snippets unless you're at that level. But like Erica was saying, that is something that might be, be able to come out in the future as, this access controls lists are being worked on and everything. That's a possibility, but at the moment, that's not something that really is available. So really the only way to allow them to register snippets would actually be to upgrade their user level to a 9 or 10. And then I see Jamie Ray has a question, what user levels can set up includes? And really in order to set up includes, you need to have source code access because there's not really any interface in OU Campus for includes. So for instance, if I look at, this page here, and you can see I have this side navigation, which is being pulled from the side navigation include. That's just this _nav.inc file here. in order to use that include, what had to happen is the developer actually went into the XSL code for the page, and it called the include for this particular section here. So if you're familiar with the code, you can look and see, okay, this uses the XSL, and it might have some dependencies. You might kind of have to chase up to see where it is. But you can see which XSL the page is starting to use. So in this case, it's Resources XSL Interior. So if I go back to that, Resources XSL Interior here, I can then see, okay, here's the code of what it's using. I can see it's also importing a couple other XSLs, so the code could be, you know, anywhere kind of in that tree, depending on where you want to put these different pieces. But in this case, you know, I see here's the side navigation template XSL that's calling it. And right here, you can see, here we go, that's kind of what I was looking for. We have a method in OU Campus. We created a function called OU include file, and all it does is you pass it the path to your file, and it will call the include for you. But as you can see, you need a little bit of source code knowledge, and you actually need to have source code access to be able to actually set up includes. And if you know, you implemented into OU Campus, you could use this XSL to be able to set up an include like that. And this can be modified depending on your implementation, whether it's a PHP include or a .NET virtual include or whatever. This function is typically available in implementations if you are able to either you understand that or you know somebody who can do that.
All right, well, unless there's any further questions, and I'm not seeing any new ones come in, we can start wrapping up the presentation. We've done our Q&A. Next month's topic is going to, so next month's Training Tuesday is going to be April 25th. On the topic of getting the most out of OU Campus, it's going to be Jeremy Rex, one of our sales directors, and Rich Paul, sales engineer, going through sort of these tips and tricks you might not have known existed in OU Campus. We'll send out registration links after the conference, which, speaking of, OUTC 17 is happening next week down in San Diego. So for those of you who are going there, we look forward to seeing you all. Oh, we do have one last question. Jamie Ray says, so if we don't want authors to access include files, we should restrict their access. I believe he means source code access.
Right. So there's kind of two things as far as access goes there. You would, you know, restrict their access to wherever those source files are. So, for instance, if you don't want them editing the XSLs, you would limit the access to those XSL files or limit their access to source code access as a user, depending on how you want to go there. The other thing that you can give them access to with an include file is the source code of the file itself. And so if that's placed in a particular location, you can potentially give them access to the include file, but not to where that include file is being included at using the XSL, or you could just you know, set and say they can't access that include file, again, using those access settings, depending on what level of limitation that you want to do. But if you do restrict them so that they can't have source code access, then they definitely would not be able to access them either way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so source code access, or you can just limit access on a per file basis.
Right.
And I don't believe there's any other questions. I'm not seeing any more come in. So great. Thank you, everybody, for attending this month's Training Tuesday. Thank you all for your questions and interaction. And we'll see, presumably some of you at the conference, and then hopefully more of you at next month's Training Tuesday. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.